Hello and welcome to She the People TB Women's Writers Fest. Uh, for the next panel today, we are talking with an author who has questioned patriarchy in a very unique way. When we talk about patriarchy, I think it is equally important to discuss its impact on men's life in our society as much as it is to see how it oppresses women. Men in our society are often given a script that is handed down to them generation after generation. It tells them how to behave, it tells them how to treat women around them, it tells them how to live their lives, how they need to be primary earners in their families, thus putting their profession over their passion. One of the unspoken rules of patriarchy that all men are expected to live by is that they retain their surnames after they get married, and women are expected to adopt the surnames of their partners. So, what happens when a man refuses to do that? And what happens when he takes his wife's surname after marriage? We have with us author Shu Matsuo Post, who took his wife's name in 2017 after their marriage and faced bias from the society because of his decision. His experience prompted him to write the book I Took Her Name: Lessons from My Journey into Vulnerability, Authenticity, and Feminism. Thank you, Shu, for being with us today. Welcome to She the People Women's Writers Fest.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me today. I've been very excited about this conversation today.
So, Shu, first of all, we would like to know what prompted you to take this decision to adopt your wife's last name.
Yeah. So to give you a little bit of background of myself, so I am a Japanese national who spent time in Japan, the U.S., and Hong Kong. And to those who are not familiar with the Japanese culture, it's very similar to what you described. Most of the time, when couples get married, it's the woman who ends up taking the man's name. It's actually 96% of the time the woman ends up taking the man's name. Partially because there's a law that prohibits married couples to have separate names. So one of the spouses has to take on their spouse's name, and what ends up happening is it's the wife who takes the husband's name usually. So, I actually married an American individual, and she told me that she wasn't going to just take my name. And so that kind of started a conversation, what we wanted to do with our last name. So after talking about how important our last names are for each of us, we decided to combine our last names. So my name was just Matsuo, and my partner's name is Post. So that's why you see my name is now Shu Matsuo Post. So you might be wondering, so why is your book called I Took Her Name? You didn't take her name. You combined your last name with your wife's. So what ended up happening in Japan is that since I couldn't combine my last name with my wife's, I actually took my wife's new name because she changed her name in the US first. So what I ended up doing was I took her name to make it mine. So that's what inspired me to write the book. And I believe in equality. And when I was growing up, I didn't think I was going to change my name. But when my wife prompted, husband's name usually. So when my wife prompted that, told me that she wasn't going to just take my name, and we decided to combine our last names, that really got me thinking, oh yeah, it should be this way. Why not? Why don't more men take their wife's name? So that's what inspired me to take her name.
That's a great story, I think. So, what was the reaction from your family and friends when you told them that, you know what, I'm going to take my wife's name?
Yeah, luckily my family was very supportive. So my parents, who are both of them are Japanese, and they never lived abroad or anything. However, they have very open minds about issues like social issues, like gender equality. And when I told them about what I wanted to do, what I was going to do, they were very supportive, and so were her parents as well. Some of my close friends, they knew me very closely, and they were supportive as well. But since my wife's name was Post, which is a pretty unique name, And a lot of people were confused why I decided to add those 4 letters after my birth name, Matsuo. Some people thought I created, when I changed my Facebook account, some people thought I created a new account just to post something on Facebook, because it's, post, P-O-S-T. But I kind of took that as an opportunity to explain why I changed my name. And for the people that I didn't know me prior, a lot of people question me like, hey, like, where are you from? How come you have 2 names? And what's the story behind your last name? So I kind of take that as an opportunity to share my story. And for the most part, people get intrigued and ask more about the process, or they're usually supportive and understanding.
That's great. I think you're one of those rare men who has found a support system. Sure, whatever you have told us about Japanese society resonates very deeply. Being an Indian, I think there are a lot of parallels that we can draw between Indian society and Japanese when it comes to patriarchal values that we inherit. So, why do you think men fail to see that patriarchy is in fact oppressing them as well, and it is they're not benefiting from it, and that's not something that they are tricked into believing?
Yeah, I think what happens to a lot of men is that whenever we talk about gender, it's a lot of men think about that's women's issues, right? It's like gender equality. Oh, that's women's issue. So they kind of like shut themselves off so that they don't think about what the issue is. I can say because I used to be that way, but gender equality obviously is feminism is it's not just women's issue. It's humanity issue, right? And the patriarchy is the enemy of feminism, because I believe the patriarchy is what separates the genders, making binary, first of all, and also creating those very rigid gender roles, right? So for men, we're expected to act very masculine, traditionally masculine, meaning very stoic, not showing any emotion, being tough, winning at all costs, right? And not seeking help, just figuring out everything on our own, acting tough, being dominant, all those qualities. And I'm not saying those are bad qualities. They can be very beautiful qualities on their own. But if you just focus on those qualities, that can be toxic. As an example, around the world, more men are committing suicides than women, even though more women show symptoms of depression early on, but they seek help from professionals or people around them. So fewer women commit suicides. Men, on the other hand, tend not to seek support from others or professionals. So they kind of try to deal with their stress and depression on their own, and some men end up killing themselves. And that's an extreme example of toxic masculinity. But I think the patriarchy tells us men too to kind of stay in the man box, so that we're supposed to be this way. Manhood is supposed to be this way. If you want to be a successful man, if you want to seem like you have value in this society, you have to act this way. There aren't that many other options in the patriarchy. So that's why I think it's also harmful for men.
That's true. Let's also talk about something that you referred. Gender fluidity is something that is not accepted even today in our society. The idea of masculinity is very rigid, but a lot of men exhibit this kind of fear towards whatever is considered feminine or fluid. How can we normalize fluidity in gender when it comes to men?
Yeah, I think the word feminism or feminist have such negative connotations to it, right? But when people hear the term gender equality, it's not as bad. I would say a lot of men believe in gender equality, but when they hear the term feminism, they back off, like, whoa, that's too much. I don't want to associate myself with that term because, when I think about feminists, I see man hating, bra burning, those angry women that are against men, right? But that's not the case. Feminism, it's about promoting, trying to achieve gender equality. So I think education is super, super important. And the reason why I'm in this work is because I want to share my story, because I used to think that way. I didn't know the patriarchy we live in a patriarchal society, and it was also harming my manhood as well. I didn't feel like I could explore the other side of the gender spectrum freely. And when I kind of let go of those expectations as a man, I felt a lot more free because I stopped caring about what society thinks of me as a man, and two, the traditionally feminine qualities are, I think they're human qualities. It's okay for men to have those qualities as well. I'm not rejecting masculine qualities at all. I think it's as humans, it's natural to have all those qualities, right? So I think talking about gender in general is a first step, and two, believing that all gender is equal. When we say masculinity is superior to femininity, there's a gender bias right there. If we think feminine qualities are as important as masculine qualities, we start to embrace those differences.
That's great. So you're a father now to a son. How
Yeah.
has this experience changed your own parenting technique?
Oh man, a lot. I'm learning a lot. So my son just turned 6 months this week, and
Wow.
yeah, and I'm learning every day as a father. And I used to, there are some sayings. Some men say, like, since having a daughter, I've become a feminist, and I disagree with that statement. You don't have to have a daughter to be a feminist. I think some people really focus on doing a better job protecting the girls and our daughters, but I think what we need to do better of is raising our sons to be better, right? Teaching them how to treat humans, treat women and girls, and what gender equality actually looks like. So I feel a greater sense of responsibility that now that I have a son. I would have felt the same way if we had a daughter too. But I think it's important to raise sons, educate our sons better.
Absolutely, absolutely. Uh, Talking about educating sons, we should also talk about educating women when it comes to gender bias and how it works against men. How do you think women act as enablers in perpetuating ideas of toxic masculinity? Do you think they tend to reject men who show their feminine side?
Yeah, I think that's a great one, and it happens quite often, right? Kind of not blaming, but believing that we're biologically different, so that we should be performing those rigid gender roles provided by the society. Biological differences are, yes, they exist, and they're beautiful parts of our lives. Yet gender is performative. So when we say, like, all women are this way, and all men are supposed to be this way, I think there's a danger in that. So, like, really challenging those stereotypes as humans, like, regardless of women or men. I think that's an important thing that we can do. And again, just like having those conversations every day. Just because you read a book about feminism, or you attend a class about gender equality or gender, that doesn't make you a feminist or someone that promotes gender equality forever. It's a practice. Gender, we perform, and performance is practice. So we need to constantly talking about this with our friends, with our family members, and challenging each other. And when you challenge each other, you don't have to attack them saying like, hey, that was not right, that was sexist all the time. That there might be situations where your uncle may make a blatantly sexist comment and you need to call it out. But oftentimes gender biases are very subtle, right? And it's important to kind of question how they got those ideas by simply asking like, hey, what do you mean by that when you say this? So, men, women, I think talking about those questioning, challenging those gender norms is a great first step to take.
Absolutely, absolutely. You raised a very important point that it's not always about shaming or calling out people who make sexist comments or
Right.
push forward gender bias. This is something that is also applicable to social media, where the
Mm-hmm.
conversation has moved from our drawing rooms. How do you think we are handling gender biases and calling out sexism in the space of digital media? Are we doing a fair job, or is there space for improvement?
It's I think digital media is a great platform to share your messages, and oftentimes our attention is so short. So sometimes they see just like a certain part of someone's statement and make a really quick judgment. Oh my gosh, like I can't believe this person said this. But it's really important to understand the context behind it or the full meaning of what the message is. So I was having a conversation with this podcast host about a term like the future is female. If you take that literally, some men might feel like they don't belong in the future society, right? Like, oh, future is female. What about boys? What about men in the future? So my interpretation is that since the history and the current have always been men, it's important to represent female in the future. So that's my interpretation. It doesn't mean that men are less than women, right? But it's so important to explain those things, and right, because if you write like a whole essay on the Instagram post, not many people might not read it. Okay. So some people kind of put like 2-word statement to catch people's attention, right? And it's important to kind of understand what those phrases are. So I think social media platforms can be very effective, and also it's important to use them in a way that's educational to other people.
That's absolutely right. A lot of users on social media platforms are young boys. We have seen cases in India recently where there were locker rooms where boys were discussing apparently rape fantasies, or fantasies that concern harming women in a sexual manner.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to invisible spaces that are not visible to the public eye, where these conversations are happening among boys, the onus of stopping them and to put it in the right direction falls on men. How can we incentivize it? How can we tell a young boy why he needs to stand up for women around him and for himself and men who are not traditionally masculine?
Yeah, totally. I think this is where role of parents and also educators come in place. It's super important to share the consequences, educate our boys about the consequences of these toxic masculine qualities, right? And the locker room talk. I've been part of it. I'm not the first man to admit it. I've been part of many, and I've made sexist comments in the past. And it's so important to call out sexism in such situations, right? So I think it's important to let your kids know at an early age, like, hey, this might happen to you. And when this happens, it's important to call it out, because if you don't, other boys and men will think it's okay. And they're going to continue to think that way for a long term. And that can be toxic consequences, like we talked about earlier. So I think it's education and talking about our kids, talking about our boys and young men, how important this is. And, this is something that parents can do. This is something that teachers at school do. This is something that older brothers can do with their siblings.
It's important, interesting that you mentioned that you had made such comments in past. You accept that, you own that. Uh, that makes me think about cancel culture that's so popular today, where people's old comments, old views are dug up and used to cancel them out.
Mm-hmm.
One sentences are used to cancel entire body of works. What are your thoughts on that? Should we cancel people entirely, or should we give them a second chance? Where does one draw the line when it comes to saying something that is sexist or doing an act that is deeply regressive, harmful to someone or
Mm-hmm.
criminal in a way?
Yeah, that's something I've been thinking about for some time, and there is no clear line for me. I think it's very situational. But if you cancel people just because they said something very harmful and negative in the past, say like 10 years, 15 years, just once, publicly, that might be too harsh. You got to look at how that person has changed, right? If that person hasn't changed, and they're likely to say something like that, I think that's a fair assessment that they haven't learned from that experience. But if that person has changed drastically and wouldn't say anything like that, I think we should give him a second chance. I think it's more about, like, if you ask me 10, 15, 20 years ago, and if you dug up everything I said, all the sexist comments that I made, man, I would be canceled right away. And those things that I've said in the past, I'm not proud of, but I'm owning those things because I am a different person now, and I want to share this story that I'm not perfect. Like, no one's perfect. We all make mistakes. It's not about being perfect all the time. When we make mistakes, I think it's just important to acknowledge and move on. And the most important part is what have you learned from that experience, and how are you gonna do better for the future.
Absolutely. I don't think it's just you. I think a lot of us would be cancelled if our old posts are dug out and old comments are dug out from their grave.
Yeah.
So moving the conversation forward, Deepshika Chakravarti wants to know, how do you undo what kids, especially boys, from the environment? I think she means learn, maybe.
Undo, like
Yeah,
unlearn,
yeah. I think
or
yes, but that's what she means.
okay. I think, yeah, once you learn something, it is hard. It is challenging to unlearn something. But it's, again, that's how society works, right? Like, things that we used to believe might not be relevant today, and it's important to update our knowledge. So again, being in a communication with people in your life, sex, gender, there are some other topics like money, and all those things are such taboo in today's world. And yet they're such important topics in life. And I think it's important to have those conversations, not at the surface level, but especially sex and gender. I think it's important to educate our kids as parents. It's something that I don't think I received when I was little, and my generation, I don't think too many people received that kind of education. But we have all those resources, so it's important to create the time and opportunity to open up those conversations so that kids can relearn and learn new things.
Absolutely. So I also wanted to know from you, as an author, when you write a book, something about you changes. I mean, the book also has the capability to change how you see the world, your views. For you, it happened the other way around. You had an experience and then you poured down into a book. But still, writing out your experience what was the biggest takeaway when you finished that book? Did something change in your mindset?
Oh yeah, totally. I've changed so much during that process of writing, right? And once you publish something like a book, it's out there. People that I don't even know will read it, have read it. So that's I think it's a ultimate form of accountability, and I might change in the future. If I'm like in 10 years, maybe the content in my book needs updated, and that's okay. That's probably going to happen, but I'm going to own it. It's something that I felt when I was writing it from 2017 to 2020. And, I definitely went through this transformation of accountability. Like everything I'm writing, I'm going to hold myself accountable, because if I'm not doing those things, who am I to tell others, what to do? So I didn't write my book to tell other men what to do. I simply wanted to share my stories because my experience really changed the way I think about gender. And I really hope the readers, especially men, will feel the same way. So it took me about a few years to find the freedom that I was looking for. And I hope the readers will find theirs in a few hours.
Absolutely. So, what's next for you as an author? Where does Shu go from here? You'll be writing another book.
Maybe in the future. It was a lot, so I don't know if I have another book in me at this point, but hopefully in the future. My focus right now is sharing my message in such platforms like this. So I'm really, really appreciative of you reaching out to me to give me an opportunity to share my message with your listeners and viewers in another country. I would have never thought this would happen if I didn't publish my book. But I keep saying education is so important. So I give speeches and workshops and seminars to students. I focus on students in Japan right now, and I also work with organizations to bring awareness of the importance of promoting gender equality in the workplace.
That's great. That's great. So, Charlie has a very interesting question for us. What do you think men and women can achieve together if they start seeing patriarchy as a problem and not each other?
I mean, that's the goal, right? I think
Yeah.
I've met a lot of people, mostly men, just thinking that feminism is the matriarchy, but they're very different. So like the patriarchy and the matriarchy, they are the opposites, right? So the patriarchy is a system that favors men. The matriarchy is a system that favors women. And feminism is neither. Feminism is inclusive. So I believe feminism includes everyone. So if the patriarchy is all about having men on the pedestal, the matriarchy is the opposite, having women on the pedestal. Feminism is taking down the pedestal altogether so that we're all on the same playing field. I think the more people start to understand feminism is trying to achieve that, hopefully they'll start to see the patriarchy is something that's not fair, not equal to everyone, and it is harmful for many.
Absolutely, absolutely, it is. So, Ayushmita has a question for you. How can the younger generation take initiative to educate the older generation about gender stereotypes? I think that's very important question, and I think
Yes.
that's something that a lot of young people want to know.
Mm-hmm. Um, I think it's the toughest task to do because
Yeah,
those generations have been conditioned to believe that way. They lived that life for so many years, right? So I think it's going to be tremendously difficult to undo the learning for them. However, we should never give up, right? We should continue to share our perspectives so that hopefully they can learn as well. I think a good example is what happened in Japan recently. So the head of the Tokyo Olympics and Paralympics Committee, Mori, who was prime minister in Japan in the past, So he said some sexist comments. Are you familiar with this incident? Yeah.
Yep.
So he ended up resigning as the chairperson or the head of the committee, and it was because that people have spoken up, on social media and on traditional media as well. So that I think he felt the seriousness of his comments. If that didn't happen, I don't think he understood what he did was so sexist, because it was, how he was raised and how he lived this society for so many years. He's 83 years old, so that's a good example. Things can happen, but I think it's it's important to continue to share our stories, so hopefully the older generations can see our perspective. And two, I would rather focus on empowering our younger generations, educating our younger generations, because they're the ones that are going to be living in this society in the future, right? And they're going to be the ones that are really making the change after our, the current generation and our generation. So, to go back to the original point, just keep sharing our perspectives, and hopefully they'll see what we're saying, and they start to change the way they think. But I think it's very difficult to expect them to change, because they've lived in this patriarchal society for such a long time.
Definitely. So, one of my fears is when we talk about feminism, is that the way social media and media specifically treats it, it appears to be a wave, a kind of fad that is being capitalized on. How can we ensure that feminism doesn't wear off? The effect of it, the call for equality doesn't fade away as fast as it rose. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's definitely not a fad. And feminism is a movement that women have been fighting for so many years, so many centuries. So by doing this, I definitely don't want to take the credit from those women who dedicate their lives to this movement. Because of then, we have more equal society than in the past, and we at the same time we got a long way to go. So I think it's important to continue this discussion, and it's great that the UN has gender equality as one of the SDGs goals, right? So we can review where each country stands in terms of the gender equality index. I think that's something that's measurable and that gets updated every year. It's a huge conversation topic in Japan, because we were ranked 121st in 153 country ranking of global gender gap index, which is pretty disappointing. Yeah, it's towards the bottom, and we can only go up from here. So it's important as a culture to continue talking about this, and at the individual level, like I said, just having those conversations about gender, calling out sexism, and really confronting those gender expectations are things that we can all do.
Definitely. Thank you so much. It was an enlightening talk. It was really fun talking to you. And thank you for taking out time today to speak with us. And thank you to our viewers. Please keep tuned in. We have more such interesting conversations lined up for you for today. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.